My role, I've discovered as a baker, is to provide good food for people. Closer? Thank you. This is not my typical day. Yeah, so as Rochelle said, I stumbled into baking, and it was all of our family got deemed gluten intolerant by one of the local naturopaths, and I sort of went into a 6-month gluten-free diet, and everything came in plastic, everything was high sugar, everything had xanthan gum in it, and it was just not the way that I ever anticipated feeding my family. I've been making bread. I was a poor uni student. I made my own bread at uni. I started with a bread maker. I actually went and worked for Baker's Delight. I was in the IT department, so I'm a IT systems analyst by trade. It actually has come in quite handy in the bakery as well. But yeah, so a part of that training when you start off at Baker's Delight, doesn't matter where you are. So I was in corporate office. They make us go into a bakery for 3 days to discover what it is that the franchisees have to deal with. And I had one day in the bakery there, and the owner turned around and he said, "Oh, you should be a baker." And I went, "Nah, I haven't even finished my other degree yet." But from that I went home and I stopped using the bread maker to shape the bread and cook the bread. I still used it to create the dough. Anyway, progression after progression after progression. The bread maker's long gone, so is commercial yeast. So what I've discovered out of my little weird and wonderful path of where I've gotten to today is that commercial yeast is absolutely horrendous for our health as a society. Commercial yeast is a very vigorous strain. It's called Cerevisiae sacramentis. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a scientist. And that was discovered as the fastest, most prolific form of yeast that anyone could use to create a loaf of bread quickly. And they came across this and they took it to World War II into the war front, and that's how they fed soldiers. So 2 to 3 hour turnaround, you can feed them up, send them back onto the front line. I'm not really worried about their gut health back then. They had a few other issues to deal with. And from that, it's then come back into general life. Yep, so industrialisation had already happened by then. So Ford's little industrial line, in came the bread line, because they could have a guaranteed reaction of what commercial yeast could give them in a product of bread. That then allows an extraordinarily quick yeast science reaction to happen. And all you're doing is basically creating carbon dioxide, which fills up the gluten bubbles, which when you put it into the oven, it puffs, makes bread. There you go, that's how you make bread. You don't need to come to a class now, that's about the guts of it. The problem with doing that is that there is no living bacteria in there to start eating away at certain things that are found in wheat that we as humans can't actually digest. So I'll just step back a notch and just bring you guys into where I am in the equation. I only use Australian organic flour. So I'm not a farmer, but what I need to do is trust the people that grow my wheat to do the best that they can to make that wheat the highest nutrient dense product that it can be. So me being naive to most farming practices, I've gone, I can hopefully rely on organic farming practices. And I understand that it doesn't always have to be organic, but from a person at, I'm sort of the middle person between a food eater and a food grower. Yeah. So what I need is to be able to have some form of credibility that I can ensure my consumers that I've done my utmost to get the best product to put into my bread. From a farming side of things, I So again, you got to bear with me on a little bit of my naivety here. But for me, if the soil's not right, if you strip the nutrients out of soil, how are the nutrients then supposed to grow a crop that has then got enough nutrients to then turn into a food product which is nutritionally beneficial for a human being? So it goes back, for me it goes back to soil. So hopefully that relates to why you are all here. So if anyone has another form of farming that I should, try and go down, but I have to rely on that organic, that certified organic. That's, I know no other, so please come to me and let me know if you think it's different. But for me, that's how I have to maintain my integrity of the product that I create. Because I'm not here to provide a food that does not somehow enhance your nutritional level. Food, the reason why we eat food is so that we live. So I don't want to provide food that doesn't make you live well. And I think that's Charlie talks about the food systems going a bit nuts, in terms of probably his side of things is probably a little different to mine. But for me, I don't understand how people can get away with producing something that they call food when it's rife with preservatives. There's no nutritional benefit whatsoever for it. As I said, this is not what I do normally. Charlie's very good at public speaking. I'm still getting there.
You're going good.
What I do have is the same passion that Charlie has. Yep, I'm absolutely adamant in what I present on a plate is going to do you good. Yep, I don't want to build into that food system that is already providing people with not enough diversity, not enough, the wheats that come out of farms these days, they've chosen a certain amount, right? And they've chosen because on a per hectare rate, that's the most amount of wheat you can get out of that. Yep, they're chosen because they grow to that height, and that's where the thresher can come through. Yep. So why, after thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years as a staple of life, now an issue for humans? And it's because of the way wheat is farmed, the way that bread is made. Yep. You guys can do the farming and I'll do the bread bit. Yep. But I need to be able to rely on you guys to give me the right stuff.
How do you make the bread?
With a lot of time. So we take 3 days to make our bread. Yeah. So yes, I am just another bakery, but my bakery is different to a lot of other bakeries in that we don't have any commercial yeast on site. We don't have any refined sugar on site. So in my bread, I use flour, salt, and water. Yep, that's it.
Don't use oil as a rice magic.
Sorry, oil? No, we put oil in our pizza dough, so I use a local organic olive oil producer, and I use that to allow the pizza bases to become malleable. Yeah. A normal bakery will use flour, water, salt. That's all okay, yeah? Then they use extra gluten, they'll use sugar, they'll use milk powder, they use bread improver, and still to this day I've never been able to get an answer from anybody that produces bread improver as to actually what's in it. And they use soy, yep, as a bulking agent. Yep. Yep. So I have an apprentice who goes to school, and this is part of my problem with the industry as well, is that my apprentice is taught how to use all these different powder formats. Yeah, and most bakers come to work, they put some water in a mixing bowl, and then they tip a bag of stuff in. And that bag has actually already been pre-mixed. And it's got soy flour to make it fluffier, it's got extra gluten to give bigger bubbles, it's got the sugar in it to make it sweeter, to also feed that aggressive commercial yeast strain. There's all this stuff that goes in there. And people wonder why we're gluten intolerant. Like, wheat naturally has gluten in it. So inside wheat there are two proteins, gliadin and glutenin. When these come across water, they turn into gluten. Gliadin is water insoluble, so it will go through your body, and this is what celiacs are allergic to. Gluten will go through your body, and gliadin, the specific protein, will go through your body and actually degrade your intestinal lining. What sourdough does, so I'll go back, bear with me again. 7 years ago I mixed some flour with some water on the bench. About 5 days later it gets a little bit bubbly. I take some of that off, I feed it more flour, more water. After about 6 weeks, those bubbles form more regularly, and it's starting to, that flour water mixture is actually absorbing and attracting the bacteria and the naturally found airborne yeasts into this mix. After about 6 months, what you're doing, all this halving it and feeding it, halving it and feeding it, is creating a bacterial family that gets bigger and stronger with every single feed you do. The yeasts that are in there, there's Cerevisiae sanfranciscenser, I think it's called, the San Francisco sourdough yeast that was named after sourdough being researched in the 1950s, 60s in San Francisco. So what I'm doing is building this powerful team of bacteria and yeast, and I use a chunk of that every day into my dough, which then they turn around and go, whoa, there's some more carbohydrates, and they eat those, and then there's more sugars that come off the high carbohydrates that the bacteria then eats. The bacteria and the yeasts are all giving away carbon dioxide, which then makes those bubbles I was talking about. That actually takes 3 days. Yep. So we feed up our sourdough starter on day 1. Day 2 we create the dough, and day 3 we bake it. It's a bit different from a 3-hour turnaround. Right. The science behind what happens in those 3 days is still being researched, but it's quite phenomenal. So the bacteria will eat the phytic acid from around the flour. Phytic acid is something that we as humans can't break down in our gut lining. So then anything inside of that we don't get as bionutrients. So by those little friendly bacteria breaking down that phytic acid, we've all of a sudden got access to a whole bunch of nutrients we've never been able to, haven't had since the 1950s. Yep. So that's the first part that it does. The second part that the bacteria does is start to break down the gluten, which humans can't digest either. So these awesome little bacteria, if they've given a chance, they go through this fermentation cycle, and what we end up with is bread that again, once again, finally, is the staple of life. Yep, it's good for us, it's clean, it's had all that bacterial work on it, and by the time it actually hits our guts, we can absorb everything that comes out of that wheat or spelt or sorghum or whatever else you want to put in there, just by the power of all these little bacteria.
Have you found that the flavours have changed with the development of that another dough or whatever you want to call it?
They do change. Our doughs mix every day. They change. So our bakers actually have to be bakers. They have to actually interpret dough. We look at it daily as to whether we put more water or less water in, as to what, we sort of know the end texture. We have a rough recipe, but we'll make it up as we go. And then depending on how far we leave it to ferment, so the fermentation goes through a lactic acid fermentation, then goes through an acetic acid fermentation. Lactic acid, like yogurt's a bit creamier and more dairy. Acetic is more like vinegar and nail polish. Not the flavour I'd necessarily want in my bread.
So when you get a rainfall event and thunderstorms, do you find that affects your bread?
Yep, the humidity. Yep, and that's why every day we change the amount of water that we put in our doughs. Yep.
Where do you get your flour from?
So my bulk bread flour, I do use a roller milled organic flour, and that comes from whole grain milling, so up at Gunnedah, who I've entrusted to have full traceability of where it comes from and who's been doing it and who's been certified and that sort of stuff. So I get the bulk of that, the roller milled from them, and then the rest of my flour I get stone ground, fresh every month from Whispering Pines. Yeah, who awesome. So I've been using them. I got given their flour for my 30th birthday because someone knew I was already into bread, and about 4 years later I rang them up and said, can I have a delivery? So it's sort of one of those serendipitous moments, and they today still deliver to me.
Where's that come from, the stone ground stuff?
Whispering Pines in Barellan, New South Wales. Yeah. Yeah. But and I don't know if it's because I'm sort of entrenched in where I'm at, but we now have in the northeast region, we now have 7 micro bakeries who are actually legitimately making sourdough, which is a huge progression. So Boondaroo have been making sourdough for a very long time. They're from Cheshunt, they've got a very Germanic, heavy style. He grows his own, mills it, bakes it. You couldn't get any more authentic than Thomas's bread. But in the last 4 years, we've had quite a few of us, more of us pop up. And we're all able to have each other supported by our locals. Yep, and every town should have its own bakery, and it should be able to be sustained by its own bakery, by its own township. We're very fortunate. We actually supply about 30 shops now. My crumpets they get a Sydney distribution, they go to Mansfield and Shepparton as well. But my bread I keep a little bit more local because it's a daily product. And I've now got 4 staff. So, yep. When it's doubled its size and it's still full of volume, we retard overnight in a fridge to allow the bacteria to continue to ferment the wheat for longer and to give it a better flavour. And so our doughs are 4 degrees when they go into the oven, so it makes it a lot easier to get crisp, clean lines when you slash as well. Yeah.
I was just going to say, can you tell us a little bit about what else you've been doing in the community with teaching?
Yeah. So we've sort of outgrown our space at the moment, but while we had a few days that we weren't actually in production, we were able to work with a couple of the local crew who would be bringing classes and schools up to do camps. Charlie's wife is one of those people, Jade Miles again, with the Greener Grass Collective. And the main aim of that camp is to show 14, 15, 16-year-old kids what it's like to farm, what it's like to know where your food comes from and how to produce food. So their entire 3-day camp or 2-day camp is the food that they eat comes off the farms that they visit. And these kids are, I think the last one was from Canterbury Girls. So, they're in Melbourne, they're in the city. So I've had a couple of those classes come through as well. I've had the local schools come through. I also do, the more fancy pants sessions. I've got 2 spaces left on Sunday. I team up with Yakandanda Organics, so Gina and Steve spoil you with food and tea and wine and all that sort of stuff, and I chew your ear off for 5 hours and teach you how to make sourdough. But what I need to let you know, in terms of health and where you get your bread from, if you want to make sure that you're eating the best bread that you possibly can and that it's actually going to do something more than, so the joke when I have school kids come through is that they might as well eat the serviette that the sausage and bread comes in, because at least you got some carbon, But if you want to make sure that what your baker is doing is the best that they can do, ask for their ingredients. If they give you more than 3 ingredients, it's not right. Yep. So sourdough, there is no government regulation around the word sourdough. Yep. So sourdough to many bakers is some powdered souring agent. You just put half a cup in with a batch. There you go, called sourdough. There is some use vinegar, some actually use a starter culture, but then they'll add yeast as well. If they're a proper baker, they will call it semi-sourdough. So they're admitting to you that yes, we have used the fermentation process and we are trying, but we needed a little bit of an extra hand to get the rising and the puffiness to happen. So most sourdoughs, if a sourdough is super, super fluffy, the other way to test it is if you squish it down. How old's this?
It's out of a freezer.
I was going to say, I don't even I recognise my loaves, and I usually know when I've made them. I'm thinking, I haven't done that for a long time.
She was apologetic. She said, I only have one in the freezer. I went, that'll do for display.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So that's not going to work. But if you actually squish sourdough, it will pop back up. It has strength, it has elasticity, it's a waxiness to it. If you squish bread, so my kids, the best thing that they have so much fun buying a white block of bread, because by the time they get home, they've actually ripped out the crusts and they've put it into a ball and it stays like that. And I've let them do that, and I've said to them, do you think you should eat that? If something does that, is that worth eating? No, it's not. Well, correct. I've done my job. Yeah. So just be very mindful. You know, a lot of people come to me and say, I've seen the naturopath, I'm gluten intolerant, so I've gone to Aldi and I've bought some sourdough.
No way.
It's like, well, just read the ingredients and I'll just won't say anything else. Yeah, because I might get sued. Yeah, so just be very, very mindful of it. Not all sourdough is sourdough. But those of us that make sourdough are usually hell-bent on doing it the proper way. And give us a break, because every day it's going to be different. And we try our best to get the end product that we want, but some days it's just hot or it's humid, or, you know, well, we put too much water in that day, we didn't do this. Every day and every hour of that day that we're in the bakery, we are monitoring that sourdough. And you got 36 hours or more, whatever that is, 72 hours where things can go wrong. But we're trying our best, and and it doesn't matter what it ends up being, it's still got a higher nutritional content than any other form of bread.
What does it look like when it goes wrong?
Oh, well, I kind of look at that and think that wasn't great. Yeah. It's usually flat, but if you find a flat bread, just cut it up and dip it in oil. It'll be fine. Yeah, I'm very pedantic about all my ingredients, except for water, which probably should be. But for me, what comes out of the tap, yes, it's got chlorine and fluoride and stuff in it. In terms of what that does to the bacteria and the yeast, it's actually negligible. Lots of people say, oh, you need to use the cleanest filtered water for those bacteria and the yeast to survive. Nah, I've got my bacteria and yeast are so hardy, they're fine with anything. My problem is if I got filtered water in, I'd have to transport it, so that takes fuel. I'd have to use plastic containers. It's plastic, don't like plastic. So I had to weigh up a few, you have your little environmental fairy, you have your, you got to figure out which fairy's talking the loudest to you. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Louise.
Bit random.
Fantastic.